Oddjob, Marlboro Projects, Brooklyn. Christmas Day, 1968. Can it possibly be a good thing that my first tangible memory involves violence? And that I was the one instigating it at 5 years old? I do have some earlier memories, but these are vague, me lying on a vast bed staring up at the yellowed ceiling. Adult voices in the distance, someone popping in occasionally, a huge face hovering above me, to smile and ruffle my hair. There's no reason to lie. I was a cute baby, tons of curly black hair, very blue eyes. As the saying goes, I had the map of Ireland on my face. So it probably wasn't a rare thing that people came in and ruffled my hair. I am happy to report that over the ensuing 6 decades, people have continued to treat me nicely. Despite that cuteness being way in the rear view mirror, and the hair even further back than that. Irishmen love to say they are descended from kings. If true in my case, these were decidedly minor kings, suffering an extended destitute stretch that landed the Conley clan at the Marlboro Projects in Brooklyn, where my parents were living at the time of my birth on February 20th, 1963. In my memory, this cluster of dreary, generic apartment buildings, a sadly representative product of the notorious New York City Public Housing Authority, had endless green spaces and sprawling play areas. While it never occurred to me to think that we were disadvantaged, my adult eyes now see that in reality, Marlboro is a low income housing development. Back then for poor whites, now for poor blacks. It's striking to see pictures and videos of the complex today. We weren't poor, strictly speaking. By 1968, when this story takes place, my father had been a New York City patrolman for 12 years, earning an annual salary of $9,400. It was a minimally comfortable living, even back when a can of Coke cost a dime. So that's how my parents, with my three brothers in tow, and eager to move to a bigger space to fit what they hoped to be even a larger family, took advantage of the subsidized housing and ended up in the projects, despite their noble lineage. My father hated being a cop. He hated being a cop for the same reason I'd hate being a cop. Who wants to deal with life's worst case scenarios, day in, day out? The only time my father ever appeared in a newspaper was after a stabbing at a Brooklyn bar. He can be seen in the tattered yellow clipping, saved by my mother from the local section of the New York Daily News, assisting the stabbed man, his white t shirt sopping with blood. The wounded man's arm is around my father's neck, who is struggling to hoist him and keep him upright as they head to an ambulance. My father, who looks in the photo as sweaty, pale, and distraught as the victim, did not like dealing with violence and depravity. He was anxious and jumpy and impatient and moody, not the cool, unflappable Clint Eastwood temperament one might wish for in a law enforcement officer. But he was also very smart. No doubt there are many smart cops, but maybe they like being cops despite their intelligence. My father did not, and he had the brains to do about a million other things with his life. But when he was discharged from the Korean War in 1953, with barely a high school education, he had enlisted on the spur of the moment, fleeing an algebra class mid-session. Options were limited. He tried out different random jobs, most incongruously a stint at Wybrandt's Hair and Scalp Systems, a hair loss company that had supposedly come up with a miracle cure, before landing exactly where similarly situated Irishmen often did, at the civil service, with the police and fire departments at the top of the list. It was Christmas Day in the guest-packed Conley apartment at the Marlboro Projects. I was a little boy, just 5, with no idea of the chaos I was about to create. I opened a gift, an action figure modeled after a character in the 1964 James Bond movie Goldfinger. Oddjob, a stout Korean fireplug of a guy in a black suit wearing a bowler hat. Infamous for decapitating and otherwise severely injuring any foe with his razor-sharp brimmed hat, launching it like a frisbee at his unsuspecting victims. The toy's packaging stated its intent clearly in big bold letters. Zazing! Deadly Derby sails through the air. It is highly unlikely I had been allowed to watch Goldfinger at age 5 or had any idea who he was. The victim in this case was not James Bond or one of his allies, but my grandmother, my dad's mother with the perfectly old school name Beatrice. Do you have a mental picture of what an ancient woman like Beatrice should look and act like? I do. She was decidedly not fun. She was very particular in her dress and demeanor, her posture impeccable. She was strict and stern. She was tightly wound. She was always clucking her tongue as if her mouth was desperately dry. Her skin was like parchment. She was exceedingly thin and pale. I remember being very intimidated by her. As I grew older, I learned that there was plenty of love beneath that prickly veneer, and my sympathy for and understanding of her grew after I did the research to uncover her epically challenging history. How her parents, Maurice and Bridget Collins, had emigrated from County Kerry, Ireland in 1898. How Bridget had died during childbirth in 1912. The infant did not survive. When Beatrice was only 2 years old. How Maurice had been committed to Kings Park State Hospital 2 years later, diagnosed with what was then called dementia praecox, now better known as schizophrenia. How Beatrice was then sent to live with the nuns at the Convent of Mercy Orphanage, where she would spend the next 14 years. How, upon Maurice's release, his visits to Beatrice at the orphanage grew more infrequent until he was again institutionalized, this time for good. He died at Kings Park in 1957. How, upon leaving the orphanage at age 18, Beatrice immediately married my grandfather Francis, who, despite exhibiting early promise as a manager at Metropolitan Insurance in Manhattan, could not defeat his alcoholism, dying of the disease at age 50, his body discovered by a patrolman after collapsing on the stairs at Kosciuszko Street subway station in Brooklyn on March 11, 1953. To be clear, I was aware of nothing about Beatrice's tragic history at age 5, or that I was on the cusp of adding to her lifetime of trauma. All I knew was that she scared the crap out of me, and that she was quite possibly the last person on earth you'd want to hit on the forehead with Oddjob's razor-sharp bowler hat. This story has one victim, many culprits. Gilbert Toys, which released the action figure in 1965, deserves particular scrutiny. Why would they make the toy so lethally realistic? Oddjob's arm was incredibly powerful. You cocked it back, and with a clicking sound, it locked in place. Press the button on his back, and the arm engaged violently, propelling the hat with a distinct whizzing sound at an alarming speed. Most terrifying was the hat itself. Safety standards back then were not what they are today, but still, one would think someone at Gilbert Toys would draw the line at drawing blood. The bowler's brim was finely honed, super sharp steel. Is it surprising that Oddjob was taken off the market after that first year? I also wish I could recall which Conley genius decided this gift was in any way suitable for a 5-year-old. Granted, kids had more freedom in the old days. I spent many a lazy Marlboro Project afternoon unsupervised, frolicking in the grass lot in front of our building. But I would think that the idea of gifting what was essentially a weapon to a child would not be advisable in any era. The first time I ever played with Oddjob, I was sitting at the kitchen table, which opened directly to the living room where the adults were gathered, haloed in a thick cloud of cigarette smoke, the volume of their chatter increasing with each cocktail and beer. The cast of characters visible through the haze would dominate every future family gathering for decades thereafter. My mother's brother, Uncle Tom, drinking his scotch, increasingly unconscious as the evening progressed, his pleasantly vacuous smile unwavering. My mother's sister May, cackling alarmingly loud, drinking beer next to her husband Jack, who even back then, well before his stroke, was rotating a thumb into his cheek, creating what became a permanent indentation. My father Frank and mother Ann, both beer drinkers back then, I learned later that they were up to at least a six-pack a night, were fulfilling their typical roles. My mother laughing and joking and loving the company. My father unable to sit, compulsively picking up every scrap of gift wrapping paper the second it hit the ground. And of course, my older brothers, Frank, Patrick, and Danny, each one a total maniac in his own special way, and collectively a uniquely challenging, rambunctious handful. It is a wonder that my mother thought she could handle even more children, with these guys running her ragged. It was only years later, inspecting my birth certificate when applying for my first passport, that I learned just how badly she wanted more children and just how much she was willing to endure to have them. Question 15A on the document asks, total number of children born alive previous to this pregnancy. Question 15B follows with, total number of children now living. The answers, two numbers in faded black type, tell a tragic tale. 5, 3. My mother had lost two children. Kevin, born on February 14, 1959, and just 18 months later, Joseph, on August 23, 1960. Both lived only a few days. When I arrived and survived, it must have felt like a miracle. Ignoring the ambient ruckus, I was toiling away at the kitchen table, head bowed down to the toy, diligently trying to figure out how the damn thing worked. These powers of concentration would serve me well later in life, but better I had given up on that day. I successfully attached the hat to his hand and managed to crank the arm back. I was holding Oddjob by the waist up in the air, searching for the launch button when, shockingly, unexpectedly, his arm shot out, the bowler hat exploded out of the kitchen, cut through the thick air of the living room, and struck the paper-thin skin of my grandmother Beatrice's milky white forehead. She looked wide-eyed, confused, before letting out a little yelp and raising her hand to her head. What had been a lively cacophony of inebriated voices went deadly quiet. Beatrice removed her hand from the wound and looked down. There wasn't a profusion of blood. After all, the cut was only as big as a miniature hat worn by a Korean assassin. But there was enough blood to be disturbing, enough to drip into her left eye. They turned towards me as one, my big blue eyes wide, my mouth slightly agape. I clutched Oddjob tightly with both hands, trying in vain to hide him under the table. It would not be the last time in my life I tried to look innocent. I don't remember seeing Oddjob or his hat ever again.